Chapter 8 of Book 8 of Metaphysics by Aristotle, translated by John McMahon. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Geoffrey Edwards. Chapter 8. Since, however, it has been determined in how many ways that which has a priority of subsistence is predicated, it is evident that energy or activity is prior to potentiality. Now, I mean by potentiality not merely a definite potentiality, which is styled an alternative first principle in another body, so far forth as it is another, but in general every first principle which is the originator of motion or of rest. For nature also may be ranked in the same genus with potentiality, for she is a first principle which is fit to be the cause of motion, not however in another body, but in itself, so far forth as it is itself. Therefore, prior to every principle of this sort is energy, or activity, both in definition and in substance, but it is also in a certain respect prior in duration, and in a certain respect it is not so. That indeed, therefore, it is prior in definition is evident. For that which is potential in regard of its possibility of energizing or assuming a state of activity, such is a thing that is primarily endued with capacity or potentiality. For example, I speak of one that is skilled in building, now, I mean one that has a capacity of building, and I speak of one that is able to see, and I mean one that possesses the capacity of seeing, and of a thing that may be seen, as that which involves the capacity of being seen. And the same reasoning also holds good as regards other things. Wherefore, the definition and knowledge of energy must needs pre-exist the definition and knowledge of potentiality. But energy, likewise, is in time prior to capacity after this mode, namely, the priority of that which actively accomplishes the same thing in species, but not in number. Now, I mean to say this, that in the case of this particular man existing at present according to energy, and in the case of the corn, and the horse, and the person who sees, prior in time are the matter, and the seed, and that which is able to see, which in potentiality constitute man, and corn, and one who sees, but are not as yet these in energy. Prior, however, to these in time are those different things that subsist in energy, and from which these have been generated. For always from an entity in capacity arises, or is generated, an entity in energy by means of an entity in energy, as man is generated from man, a musician by means of a musician, on the condition of something that is primary in its nature always imparting motion. The moving power at present, however, subsists in energy, or activity, but it has been declared in our disquisitions concerning substance that everything that is generated from something and by something, and that this is the same in species. Wherefore also it seems to be impossible that a builder be a person not likely to have built anything, or a harpist to be one who has not harped anything. For one who learns to play upon the harp learns to play upon the harp by actually playing upon the harp. It is also the case, in like manner, with other artists. Whence arose the argument, by refutation, of the sophists, that one who is not in possession of scientific knowledge will accomplish the mastery of that about which such scientific knowledge is conversant, for the learner of a science is not in possession of it. But in reply to this we may observe that from the fact that something of that which is being produced or generated has been produced, and that in general something of that which is being moved has been moved, now this is evident according to what has been proved in our disquisitions concerning motion. The learner also in this case must needs possess something, perhaps of scientific knowledge, But then also by this it is at any rate evident that energy in this way likewise is prior to potentiality in regard of generation and time. But unquestionably it is also prior in substance at least in the first place indeed then, because those things that are subsequent in generation are prior in form and substance, as a man to a child, and a human being to seed. For now the one possesses the form, but the other does not. And in the second place, this is so because everything that is being produced advances towards a first principle and an end. For the final cause is a first principle, and the generation or production is on account of the end. But energy is an end, and on account of this is potentiality assumed. For not in order that they may have the power of vision do animals see, but they have the power of vision that they may see. In like manner also, persons are in possession of the building art, or capacity that they may actually build, and of the speculative art that they may devise systems of speculation. They do not, however, devise speculative systems that they may have the speculative capacity, unless those who do so for the sake of meditation. Yet these by no means speculate absolutely, but they either speculate in this manner, or the fact is so that they have not in any wise an occasion to speculate. Moreover, matter subsists in potentiality because it may advance onwards to form, but when at least it subsists in energy, then doth it subsist in form. In like manner also is it the case with other things, and those of which the end is motion. Wherefore, as those engaged in teaching by showing, in the way of example, one energizing, say, their pupil, think that they have adduced the end, it is so with nature in like manner. For if this be not the case, a circumstance, like the mercury of Paso, will take place. For scientific knowledge would be obscure as to whether it might be internal or external, as was the case with Paso's Hermes likewise. For an end is the work, and the work constitutes the energy. Wherefore the name energy is denominated according to the work, and converges towards actuality. And since of some things that which is ultimate is the use, as, for example, of the power of vision, the act of vision, and besides this, no other work is produced different from the power of vision, yet in certain things is there something else generated. For example, from the art of house building a house is produced in addition to the act of building, notwithstanding that energy, nevertheless, will be the end of potentiality in both instances, to be sure, though it is more the end of it in the latter than in the former. For building is contained in that which is being built, and is generated and exists at the same time with the house. Of as many things, therefore, as there is something different, namely, that which is being produced from their use, of these doth there subsist the energy in that which is being constructed, just as both the building resides in that which is being built, and the weaving in that which is being woven. In like manner also is it the case with other things, and in general doth motion subsist in that to which motion is being imparted. Of as many things, however, as there is not some different work beside the energy, in these is energy inherent, as, for instance, the act or power of seeing resides in the person who sees, and theory in the theorizer, and vitality or life in the soul. Therefore also is happiness resident in the soul, for it also constitutes a certain sort of vitality. Wherefore is it evident that substance and form are each of them a certain energy. And therefore, according to this reasoning, it is evident that in substance energy is prior to potentiality, and, as we have stated, one energy invariably is antecedent to another in time, up to that which is primarily and eternally the moving cause. But assuredly, also, in a more strict and important sense, is energy prior to capacity. For the things that are eternal are in substance prior to things that are perishable, yet nothing subsisting in potentiality is everlasting. And a reason of this is the following. Every potentiality is at the same time a potentiality of its contradiction. For that which is not endued with the capacity of existing will not subsist in anything, but everything that is endued with capacity admits of not energizing. Accordingly, that thing the existence of which is potential admits of both being and not being. The same thing, then, is that which is potential, or endued with a capacity of both being and not being. But that thing, the non-existence of which is potential, admits of not being, and that which admits of not being is subject to decay, either simply, or it is not this very thing, the admissibility of whose non-existence is affirmed, either according to place, or according to quantity, or according to quality, but simply is a thing exposed to corruption according to substance. None, then, of those things that are simply incorruptible is an entity in potentiality simply considered, but in a certain respect there is no hindrance to this being so, for instance, according to quality, or the place where. All things, then, subsist in energy, nor even on the supposition of things being from necessity are these things, however, primary, for unless these were so, there would be nothing so. Nor therefore, again, supposing there is any eternal motion, does such a motion subsist in capacity, nor supposing that there is anything that is being eternally moved, such a thing that is being moved does not subsist according to capacity, unless so far as it proceeds from a certain quarter, or towards a certain direction. There is no hindrance, however, to the subsistence of the matter of this. Wherefore, the sun and stars and the entire firmament perpetually energize. No apprehension also is there lest at any time they may come to a standstill, which dread overwhelms some of the natural philosophers. For neither are the heavenly bodies wearied in this operation of revolving, for their motion does not happen to subsist in regard of the capacity of the contradiction of those, as, for example, is the case with things subject to decay, so as to render the continuity of the motion a laborious operation. For substance, which is matter and potentiality, and does not subsist in energy, is the cause of this. There is, however, an imitation between things incorruptible and those that are in a state of change, for instance, earth and fire. For these also invariably energize, seeing that they involve motion essentially and in themselves. But all the rest of the potentialities, about which we have discoursed, from the distinctions and definitions that have been framed, it is evident are conversant about contradiction. For that which is endued with the capacity of imparting motion in this particular way, can also do so in another way, and not in this way. I mean, as many things at any rate as subsist as potentialities according to a rational principle. Potentialities, however, that are devoid of reason in respect of presence and absence will as the same be conversant about contradiction. If, then, there are certain natures of such a sort, or substances of such a description, as those speculators who have been engaged in such theories affirm ideas to be, something would there be which would be skilled in scientific knowledge in a greater degree than science itself, and something would be much more moved than motion itself. For the former rather are energies, but the latter are potentialities of the former. That, therefore, energy is a thing prior both to potentiality and every alternative first principle is evident. Chapter 9. But that also energy is both superior and more excellent than potentiality, however excellent, is evident from these statements. For as many things as are denominated according to the being potential, as far as these are concerned, it is the same thing the being what is potential in regard of contraries. For instance, that which is said to be endued with a capacity of health and sickness is the same thing, and that too at the same time, for there is the same capacity, or potentiality of being in a sound state of health, and being indisposed, and of being at rest, and in motion, and of building, and of demolishing what is built, and of being built, and falling into ruin. The capacity, then, of accomplishing contraries exists at the same time, but the actual subsistence of these contraries at the same time is a thing that is impossible, and it is a thing that is impossible that contrary energies be also present at the same time, for instance, in the case of being healthy and being indisposed. Wherefore, either of these must needs be that which is good, and it must in like manner be possible that this be the case with both or neither. Energy, accordingly, is the more excellent of the two. There is, however, a necessity that, as regards that which is bad, the end and energy should be worse than the potentiality, for that which is endued with capacity, as regards both the contraries, is the same thing. It is evident, then, that what is evil is not anything independent of the things themselves, for that which is evil is by the constitution of nature subsequent to that which we term potentiality. Accordingly, neither in those things which subsist from a first principle, and those that are everlasting existences, is there anything that is either evil, or anything in the shape of imperfection, or aught that has been actually reduced to decay. For a tendency towards decay or corruption belongs to things that are evil. But mathematical figures are also discovered as subsisting in energy, for persons discover such in the act of division. And if such had been divided in twain, these mathematical figures would have been apparent, but now are they inherent potentially. Why, let me ask, has a triangle angles equal to two right angles? Because the angles about one point are equal to two right angles. If, therefore, the line about the side be produced, to one who merely glances at the figure the thing is at once obvious. Why, too, in a semicircle is the angle universally a right angle? Because if there are three equal right lines, or even two at the base, and one right line raised thereupon from the central point, the thing will be obvious to any one at a glance, provided he be a person that has some knowledge of mathematics. Wherefore it is evident that mathematical diagrams, subsisting as they do in potentiality, are discovered when they are being reduced to energy, and the cause of this is the following, that understanding constitutes the energy, wherefore from energy springs potentiality, and on account of this circumstance persons engaged in doing anything are acquainted with that thing, for subsequent in regard of production is energy, I mean such as subsists according to number. Chapter 10. Since, however, entity and non-entity are denominated partly in accordance with the figures of the categories, and partly in accordance with the capacity or the energy of these, or in accordance with contraries, but since that which is entity in the strictest sense of the word is what is true or false, and this in the case of things consists in composition or division, so that one can verify his assertion who considers that which has been divided to be divided, and that which has been compounded to be compounded, but he speaks falsely who, when either things are or when they are not, makes assertions about them in a contrary way to that in which they actually subsist. Seeing then that this is the case, the thing is termed true or false, for it is fitting that we should take into consideration what this is which is termed true or false. For it is not on account of a true supposition on our parts of your being white that you are in reality white, but on account of your being white, we who make this assertion as to your whiteness can verify our assertion. If, therefore, some things are invariably compounded and involve an impossibility of being divided, but if other things are perpetually in a state of division and are not endued with a capacity of being put together again, and if some things are the recipients of contraries, in such a case actual existence is the being compounded, and the being one thing, but non-existence the not being compounded, but the being more than one thing. Respecting, then, admissible or contingent natures, the same opinion becomes false and true, and this is the case with the same definition, or discursus, and they involve the possibility of true assertions being made of them in one instance, but false assertions in another. Regarding, however, things that are devoid of a potentiality of being disposed otherwise than they are, a thing in this case is not generated so as at one time to be true, but at another false, but these things are invariably true and false. And therefore, in regard of incomposite natures, what, let me ask, is the being or not being, and what the true and the false in respect of these? For it is not a thing that is compounded so that it actually involves existence when it may be in a state of composition, but does not involve existence when it may subsist in a state of division, as a piece of white wood, or the incommensurability of the diagonal of a square with its side. Neither will the true and the false, in like manner, be still inherent also in those things, I mean incomposite natures. Or shall we say that, as neither that which is true in regard of these, so neither is their actual existence the same, but the one is that which is true, while the other is that which is false? Contact and assertion give us that which is true, for not the same thing is affirmation with assertion. Not, however, to pass into contact amounts to ignorance, for deception about the nature of anything has no existence, save by accident. In like manner, also, is it in the case of substances that are uncompounded, for deception in regard of them is not a thing that is possible. And all such substances subsist in energy, not in potentiality, for if they subsisted in potentiality, they would be generated, and in process of time would be corrupted. But in the present instance, the actual entity is not generated, nor is it reduced into corruption, for it would be generated from something. And as regards whatsoever things, therefore, that amount to the existence of any certain particular thing, and its subsistence in energy or activity, as regards these, I say, there is no possibility of labouring under deception, but either one understands them or he does not. But the inquiry as to the nature of anything is being instituted by us in respect of these natures, as to whether there are things of this sort at all or not. And the fact is, the existence of a thing is as that which is true, and its non-existence as that which is false. In one way, if it is that which is compounded, it is true, whereas in the other, if it is not a composite nature, it is false. And in another way, if we suppose it to exist in this way, it is true, but if not in this way, it is not true. Now, that which is true amounts to the intellectual apprehension of these, but that which is false does not exist, nor does it amount to deception, but ignorance. Not, however, such as may be assimilated unto blindness. For blindness is just as if one, in short, did not possess the capacity of intellectually apprehending any subject. And it is also evident that, respecting things that are immovable, there is no deception as to the time when of their existence, supposing that one consider them as things that are immovable, for instance, the triangle, unless viewed as that which is subject to mutation. A mathematician will not consider as being at one time in possession of angles equal to two right angles, but at another not so, for it would undergo a certain mutation. Yet he might consider one thing in this point of view, but not another, for example, that there be no even number, first, or that some are so, but that other numbers are not so. In regard, however, of one thing in number, we cannot expect that he should entertain this opinion, for no longer would he do so as regards certain things, yet not as regards others, but he will speak truth or falsehood so far as he makes assertions of it as a thing that is invariably disposed in this way. End of chapter 10 and end of book 8. Recording in memory of Mitchell Edwards. Chapter 1 of Book 9 of Metaphysics by Aristotle, translated by John McMahon. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Geoffrey Edwards. Chapter 1. That unity is denominated in many ways has been previously declared in our divisions on its multifarious predications, and whereas it is denominated in many ways, there are summarily arranged 4 modes of things that are styled one, primarily and essentially, but not according to accident. For both that which is continuous, either simply considered, or especially what is so by nature at least, and not by contact, or by a bond of connexion, such is one thing, and that in a more eminent degree is one thing, and prior to these, of which the motion is more indivisible, and simple rather. Moreover, is unity a thing of this sort, and in a more eminent degree is that which is a whole one thing, and that which possesses a certain form and species. But particularly we look for unity if a thing of this sort subsists by the constitution of nature, and not by violent or abnormal means. In like manner as whatever things are joined together by glue, or by a nail, or by a chain, are one thing, but contains in itself the cause of its own continuity. And it is a thing of this kind in respect of its motion being one and indivisible in place and time, so that it is evident if anything by the constitution of nature involves a principle of the earliest motion, I mean such a principle as is primary, that it is the first magnitude, as for example, I speak of the circular motion of a body, for this is the earliest motion. Therefore, in this way are some things one, either as what is continuous or entire. Others, however, are one of which the definition may be one, and things of this sort are such as those of which the intellectual apprehension is one, and such as those of which it is indivisible, and of which there is an indivisible apprehension of what is indivisible in form or number. In number, therefore, is the singular indivisible, but in form that is indivisible which resides in what is an object of knowledge, and in scientific knowledge itself. Wherefore, that would be one thing primarily, which is the cause of the subsistence of unity in substances. Therefore, no doubt, is unity denominated in such many ways, as both that which is continuous by the constitution of nature, and is an entirety, and a singular, and that which is universal. Now, all these are one in respect of the indivisibility of the motion of some of them, but of the intellectual perception or the definition of others. It is requisite, however, to understand that we should not assume that the same assertions should be made alike in the inquiries, both as to what sort of things are styled one, and what is the nature of the existence of unity, and what is the definition of it. For unity is predicated in thus many ways, and each of those things will be one in which any one of these modes will be inherent. The being or existence of unity, however, sometimes will be in accordance with one of these, and sometimes with another, which also is nearer to the name, but those are one in regard of capacity. Just as also, if it may be expedient to discuss the subject relating to element and cause, it would be necessary, in the treatment of these matters, both to frame distinctions and to assign the definition of the name. For fire, in one sense, is an element, and perhaps also with the infinite in itself this is the case, or it is something else of the sort, and in another sense it is not so. For the essence of element is not the same thing with the essence of fire and of element, but so far forth as fire is a certain thing and a certain nature, so far is it an element, but the name signifies that this particular quality is an accident in this, because there is something subsisting from this, as from a thing that is primarily inherent. So also is it in the case of cause and unity, and all things of this sort. Wherefore also the essence or existence of one consists in being indivisible, namely, in being this certain particular thing, and incapable of a separate subsistence, either in place or form, or in the faculty of thought, or in that which is entire, and has been made the subject of definition. But especially doth the nature or essence of unity consist in being the first measure of every genus, and the principal portions of quantity. For from this quarter likewise hath it proceeded to other things. For measure is that whereby quantity is known, but quantity, so far forth as it is quantity, is known either by unity or by number. For every number is known by unity. Wherefore every quantity, so far forth as it is quantity, is discoverable by unity, and that by which as primary it is known, this itself is one. Wherefore unity is a first principle of number, so far forth as it is number, and hence also in the case of other things that is denominated a measure whereby as primary each thing is known, and the measure of everything is one in length, in breadth, in depth, in gravity, in velocity. For gravity and velocity are what is common in the case of contraries, for in a twofold sense may each of them be taken, as, for instance, gravity is both that which involves any momentum whatsoever, and that which possesses a superabundance of momentum, and velocity is both that which involves any motion whatever, and an excess of motion. For likewise is there a certain velocity even of that which is slow, and there is a certain gravity of that which is rather light. Now a measure and first principle in all of these is a sort of unity, and a thing that is indivisible, since, to give an instance, in lines also they employ that which measures a foot as a thing that is indivisible. For everywhere, or in every instance, do investigators search for measure as a certain unity, and as a thing that is indivisible, and this constitutes what is simple, either in the quality or in the quantity. Wheresoever indeed, therefore, there does not appear to be anything subtracted or added, this is the most accurate measure. Wherefore the measure of number is the most precise of all measures, for the monad they have posited as in every way indivisible, but in the case of other things they imitate a measure of this sort. For from a stadium and a talent, and that which is invariably greater, would anything that has been both added and taken away rather escape our notice, than from that which is less. Wherefore that from which, considered as primary, a thing does not admit of subsisting according to sense, this all men constitute as a measure both of things moist and dry, and of gravity and magnitude. And they imagine that they then know the quantity of a thing when they happen to know it by means of this measure. And therefore also motion do they measure by a simple motion, and one which is the most rapid, for this involves the very smallest possible duration. Wherefore in astronomy a unity of this kind is a first principle and a measure, for their hypothesis is that the motion of the heavens is equable, and that it is of the utmost velocity, and in accordance with this astronomers adjust the other motions. And in music diesis is adopted as a measure because it constitutes the least perceptible sound, and in the case of vocal sounds it is an element of speech that is such. And all these things in this way are a certain one, not in such a manner as that the one is a thing common to them, but in such a way as has been declared. A measure is not, however, invariably one in number, but sometimes more than one, as for instance 2 dieses, such as are not understood according to hearing, but are contained in the definitions. And the vocal sounds by which we measure are more numerous, and the diameter of the square likewise is measured by 2 things, and This is the case with the side, and with all magnitudes. Thus, therefore, is unity a measure of all things, because we thereby know those things of which substance consists by making a division of it, either according to quantity or according to form. And on this account is unity indivisible, because the original of everything is that which is indivisible. But each thing is not indivisible in the same manner as a foot and the monad, but the latter is indivisible in every respect, and the former has a tendency towards things that are indivisible according to sense, as just now has been remarked, for perhaps everything continuous is divisible. The measure, however, is always a thing of a kindred nature, for of magnitudes is magnitude the measure, and in regard of an individual thing, length is a measure of length, breadth of breadth, of vocal sounds, voice is a measure, weight a measure of weight, a monad of monads. For in this way must we receive this assertion, but not to the effect that number is a measure of numbers, although this ought to be the case if measure, in like manner, in this case is to be kindred with what is measured. But he who entertains this opinion does not think similarly of this instance, but just as if one would suppose that monads are a measure of monads, but not a monad. Number, however, is a multitude of monads. And science we pronounce to be the measure of things and sense. Likewise, for this very reason, because we attain unto some knowledge through the instrumentality of these, since rather are they measured than are they standards of measure. But it happens unto us, just as if another were measuring us, we should know how large we were by reason of the cubital measure being extended over us thus far. Protagoras, however, says that man is the measure of all things, just as if he should say that one who possesses scientific knowledge, or who goes through an act of perception by sense, is a measure, and that this is so with these, because the one possesses sense, but the other scientific knowledge, which we affirm to be measures of those things that are subjects to either one or the other. Doubtless, such persons in their assertion of nothing that is extraordinary appear to say something pertinent to the matter in hand. That, therefore, indeed, the being or essence of unity subsists in an eminent degree, according to the name which they determine upon as a certain measure, and the most important measure, of quantity, and in the next place of quality, this is evident. Now, a measure of this sort will be of one kind, if it may be indivisible as far as regards quantity, but of another, if it be so as regards quality. Wherefore, unity is indivisible, either simply or so far forth as it is unity. Chapter 2. But, as regards substance and nature, we must institute an inquiry how they are disposed in like manner, as in the doubts mooted in the earlier portions of this work we have taken a review of what unity is, and how one ought to take up his opinions respecting the same, whether as though this unity were to be considered as a certain substance, as both the Pythagorics affirm in the first instance, and Plato subsequently, or rather whether some nature is subjected to it, and in what manner this ought to be more intelligibly discoursed of, and whether, rather, is it the case that we should look at unity from the point of view that some of the natural philosophers do. For of those a certain one says that unity is harmony, but another air, and a third the infinite. Now, if it is not possible for any of the universals to be substance, as has been declared in our disquisitions concerning substance, and in those concerning entity, nor that this very thing be substance, so as to be endued with the capacity of subsisting as a certain one thing separate from plurality, for a thing of this kind is what is common, but alone may be ranked as a category, it is evident, if the foregoing be true, that neither is unity itself a substance, for entity and unity in an eminent degree above other things are predicated universally of all things. Wherefore, neither are genera certain natures and substances capable of a separable subsistence from other things, nor does unity admit of being a genus, on account of the same causes through which neither does unity or substance admit of being a genus. And further, in like manner, it is expedient that the case stand in regard of all things. Now, unity and entity are predicated in an equal number of ways. Wherefore, since in quantities there is a certain unity and a certain nature, and since, in like manner, both of these reside in quantities, it is plain that likewise, in general, we must investigate what unity is, as well as what entity is also, as if it were not sufficient to determine that this very thing is the nature of it. But unquestionably, in colours at least, there is the one colour, for example, white. Afterwards, the rest appear to be produced from this and black. But black is a privation of white, as darkness also is of light. But this is a privation of light. Wherefore, if entities were colours, entities would constitute a certain number. But of what, let me ask? Without doubt, manifestly of colours. And unity would be a certain one thing, as for example, white. And in like manner also, if entities were melodies, there would be a number of diases, however, but the substance of them would not be number, and unity would be something the substance of which would not be unity, but diasis. In like manner also, in the case of the elements of sounds, if all entities were sounds, they would constitute the number of the elements, and unity would be a vocal element. And if entities were right-lined figures, they would constitute the number of figures, and unity would be a triangle. And the same reasoning stands good likewise in the case of the other genera of things. Wherefore, if also in passive properties, and in qualities, and in quantities, and in motion, there subsist numbers, and a certain one thing in all these, unity would be both a number of certain things, and it would constitute a certain entity. But by no means would this be the substance of that thing. And as regards substances, the case must needs be the same, for in like manner is it in the case of all things. That, therefore, unity in every genus is a sort of nature, and that this very thing, namely, unity, is not the nature of anything is evident. But as in colours there is one colour to be sought for as unity itself, so also in substances is one substance to be sought for as unity itself. But that somehow unity and entity are equivalent in their meaning is evident from the fact that unity follows upon the categories in an equal number of ways with entity, and yet does not subsist in any of them, as, for example, neither in quiddity nor in quality, but it subsists in like manner as entity. And from this fact it follows that there is not anything different from man additionally predicated in the predication of one man, as neither is entity anything independent of quiddity, or quality, or quantity, and that the being of unity is the same thing as the being of some individual thing. Chapter 3. Unity, however, and plurality are opposed in many ways, in one of which modes the unity and the multitude are opposed, as what is indivisible and what is divisible. For that which has been divided, or is actually divisible, is styled a certain multitude, but what is indivisible, or that which has not been divided, is styled one. Since, therefore, the oppositions are fourfold, and one of these is expressed according to privation, there would subsist what is contrary, and neither would they be denominated as contradictions, nor as things predicated relatively. But unity is predicated from its contrary, and thereby made evident, viz. That which is indivisible from that which is divisible, from the fact that multitude and that which is divisible are rather cognizable by sense than that which is indivisible. Wherefore, in the definition, the multitude is prior to that which is indivisible by reason of perception by sense. There also belong to unity as we have likewise described in our division of contraries, sameness, and similarity, and equality, but to multitude belong diversity, and dissimilarity, and inequality. Seeing, however, that sameness is predicated in many ways, after one mode also, namely, according to number, subsists that which we denominate occasionally as this, and after another mode, if a thing be one, both in definition and in number. For instance, you are the same with yourself, both in form and matter. Further, are those things said to be the same to the primary substance of which there may belong one definition. As, for instance, equal right lines are the same, and equal-angled quadrangular figures, notwithstanding that they are many in number, but in these the equality is unity. And things are said to be similar, if they be not the same simply considered, nor without a difference in regard of subject substance, but yet may be the same as regards form. For example, the greater square is similar to a less, and so it is with unequal right lines, for these are similar, no doubt, but not the same absolutely. And some things are called similar if they possess the same form, wherein reside the more and less, as properties ingenerated, while the things themselves are neither greater nor less. And other things are so styled if there belong to them the same passive condition, and such as is one in species, as, for instance, that which is exceedingly white, and what is so in a less degree, they say that such are similar because the form of them is one. And other things are so called if they possess more of sameness than of diversity, either considered simply, or provided they be more obvious to perception as possessing such. For instance, tin is more similar to silver than to gold, and gold is similar to fire, so far forth as it is ruddy and brilliant. Wherefore it is evident that both diversity and dissimilarity are denominated in many ways, and that which is another thing is expressed in opposition to that which is the same. Wherefore everything in relation to everything is either the same or different, but that is said to take place if the matter and the definition be not one. Wherefore you and your neighbour are different. But a third signification of the foregoing is when things subsist as in mathematical entities. Therefore, indeed, on this account, everything of those, as many as are denominated unity and entity, are so denominated in reference to everything as different or the same. For neither is there any contradiction of sameness. Wherefore, the assertion is not made in the case of non-entities, but of all entities. The not same, however, is predicated of entities. For sameness and diversity being constituted by nature an entity, and one thing, are either one or not one. That, then, which is diversity, and that which is sameness, are in this way opposed. Difference, however, and diversity are something else, for it is not requisite that a thing which is diverse, and that in reference to, or because of which a thing is diverse, should be a diverse thing by reason of something common. For everything whatsoever, in regard of its being an entity, is either diverse or the same. That, however, which is different from something is different by something, or in some respect, so that it is necessary that something wherein they differ should be the same, and this something which is thus the same is either genus or species. For everything that is different differs either in genus or in species. Those things differ in genus, of which neither the matter is common, nor their generation into one another. For instance, take the case of those things of as many as there is another figure of predication. But things are different in species, of which the genus may be the same, and that is called a genus in respect of which both of the things that are different are styled the same according to substance. But contraries are things different, and contrariety is a certain difference. And that we have made this foregoing supposition correctly is evident from induction. For all those things that are different, their difference is even apparent, and not merely so when they are diverse, but some things are diverse in genus, but others are diverse which belong to the same coordination of predication. Wherefore also those same things that are contained in the same genus are also involved in the same species. Now it has been determined in the case of other things what sort of entities are the same or different in the genus. Chapter 4. But since it is admissible that things which are different should differ one from another more and less, there is likewise a certain greatest difference, and I mean by this contrariety, and that there does exist this greatest difference is evident from induction. For some things that are different in genus do not possess a way one towards another, but are distant to a considerable extent, and are not things that may be compared together. To those things, however, that differ in species belong generations that take their rise from contraries, as from extremes, but the last interval is the greatest. Wherefore also is this the case with that which lies between the contraries. But surely this which is the greatest in each genus, at any rate, is that which is perfect, for greatest is that of which there is no excess, or superabundancy, and finished is that beyond which there is no possibility of assuming anything, for the perfect difference involves an end. In like manner as other things are called perfect or finished in respect of their involving an end. But to the end there is nothing extrinsic, for it is the ultimate thing in everything, and comprises those things of which it is the end. Wherefore nothing is extrinsic to the end, nor does the perfect require anything of the sort. That therefore indeed contrariety constitutes a perfect difference is evident from these statements. And whereas contraries are denominated in many ways, subsistence in a perfect manner will follow in such a way as that the subsistence also of contraries would be inherent in them. Now, seeing that these things are so, it is plain that there is no possibility of one thing involving many contraries, for neither could there be anything more ultimate or final than the extreme, nor of one interval would there be more than two extremes. And in general, if contrariety be a difference, yet difference is the difference between two things, wherefore also this will be the case with the perfect difference. It is necessary, however, that the rest of the definitions also of the contraries be correct. For, likewise, doth the perfect difference evince the greatest amount of difference. For of things that differ in genus and in species, there is no possibility of assuming anything that is more external, for it has been demonstrated that respecting things extrinsic to the genus there subsists not a difference, and of these this is the greatest difference. And those things that belong to the same genus, and involve the greatest difference, are contraries, for the greatest difference of these is the perfect difference. And those things that involve the greatest amount of difference in the same recipient are contraries, for there is the same matter for the contraries. And things that rank under the same potentiality, and involve the greatest difference, are also contraries. For also the science is one concerning one genus of those things in which the perfect difference is the greatest. The first or chief contrariety, however, consists in habit and privation, yet not every privation, for privation is predicated in many ways, but whatsoever such as may be perfect. And the other contraries will be denominated according to these, some on the one hand in respect of possession, and others from action, or from being fit subjects for action, and on the other hand some in respect of their being recipients, and rejections of these, or of other contraries. Now, if they are opposed, I mean contradiction and privation, and contrariety and relations, and if of these contradiction is the first, and of contradiction there is nothing intermediate, but if of contraries this is admissible, it is evident that contradiction is not the same thing with contrariety, and that privation constitutes a certain contradiction. For privation belongs either to what is entirely devoid of a capacity of possessing, or to that which, even though adapted by nature for possession, may yet not actually possess either entirely or in a certain definite manner. For we now express this in many ways, just as the distinctions have been drawn by us elsewhere. Wherefore, privation is a certain contradiction, or a defined impotentiality, or one which is conjoined along with what is receptive. Wherefore, of contradiction there is not anything that is intermediate, but of a certain privation there is. For everything is either equal or not equal, but not everything is equal or unequal, but only if it be contained in that which is receptive of equality. If now there are generations in matter from contraries, and these are produced either from form and the habit of the species, or from a certain privation of the species and of the form, it is evident that every contrariety would constitute a certain privation, but not every privation, perhaps, would constitute contrariety. And a cause of this is the following, that whatever is a subject of the privation admits of being a subject of privation in many ways, for those things from the extremities of which changes are generated, these are contraries. And this is evident likewise from induction, for every contrariety involves a privation of either of the contraries. Not similarly, however, is it the case with all things, for inequality is a privation of equality, but dissimilarity of similarity, and vice of virtue. But there is the same difference, as has been stated, for one thing is a subject of privation if it may happen to be deprived of anything, but another if it may be so at any time, or in any subject, as, for example, would be the case at a certain age, either in that which is the principal age, or altogether so. Wherefore, of some contraries is there a medium, and there is a man who is neither good nor evil, but of others there is not a medium, but a number must needs be either odd or even. Further, do some things involve a definite subject, but others do not. Wherefore it is evident that invariably either of the contraries is denominated according to privation. It is sufficient, however, if there are in existence the primaries and the genera of contraries, as for instance, unity and plurality are styled such, for the rest are referred or reduced to these. End of Chapter 4 of Book 9. Recording in memory of Mitchell Edwards. Of Book 9 of Metaphysics by Aristotle, translated by John McMahon. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Geoffrey Edwards. Chapter 5. But since one thing is contrary to one thing, a person would feel perplexed as to how unity and plurality are opposed, and how the equal is opposed to the great and the small. For there is the question whether invariably we speak of a thing in the way of opposition, for example, whether it is white or black, and whether it is white or not white. But we do not say whether such is a man or a thing that is white, unless hypothetically, and in such an inquiry, as for instance, whether Cleon came or Socrates. But there is no necessity for this inquiry being found in any genus. But this, likewise, has proceeded from thence. For things in opposition do not admit of subsisting alone at the same time, which aforesaid mode of speaking of a thing one employs in the present instance, I mean in the inquiry which of the two came first. For if both could do so at the same time, the question would be ridiculous. And if this were possible in this way also, in like manner would the person who makes the inquiry fall into opposition, viz. Into unity, or plurality, as, for example, whether both came or either of the two. If, therefore, in things that are opposed, the question whether a thing is so and so, is to be found invariably. Now, we speak of a thing as to whether it is greater, or less, or equal. What opposition is there of equality in respect of these? For neither is it contrary to either only, nor to both. For why should it be contrary to the greater more than to the less? Further, is the equal contrary to that which is unequal? Wherefore it will be contrary to more than one. If, however, inequality signifies the same thing with both of these at the same time, it would be in opposition to both. And the doubt renders assistance to those who say that inequality constitutes the duad. It happens, however, that one is contrary to two, which is impossible. Moreover, equality seems to be a medium between the great and the small, but no contrariety seems to be either of the nature of a medium, nor from the definition is it a thing possible that it should. For it would not be perfect if it were a mean between anything, yet it rather invariably involves something that is a medium with respect to itself. It therefore remains that equality be opposed either as negation or as privation. Now, certainly, it is not possible that it should be in opposition to either. For why should it be opposed to the large more than to the small? In such, then, there would subsist a privative negation of both. Wherefore also the question whether is predicated in respect of both, but not in respect of either, as we do not say whether a thing is greater or equal, or whether it is equal or less, but the question of whether invariably subsists in reference to three things. It does not, however, constitute privation from necessity, for it does not follow that everything is equal which is not greater or less, but that takes place in the case of the things in which those, I mean, the greater or less, are naturally inherent. Now equality is that which is neither great nor small, but that which by nature is adapted for becoming great or little, and as privative negation is it opposed to both. Wherefore also it is a thing that is a medium, and that which is neither evil nor good is in opposition to both, but without a name, for in many ways is each denominated, and that which is receptive is not one thing, but rather that which is neither white nor black. Neither, however, is this styled one thing, but colours are somehow defined in respect of which this negation is affirmed privatively. For it is requisite that this be either a negation of white and black, or that it be a thing devoid of colour, or something else of the sort. Wherefore those persons do not correctly reprehend our remark on this point, who are of opinion that all things are expressed similarly. Wherefore there will be between a shoe and a hand something that is a medium, which will be neither shoe nor hand, since also that which is neither good nor bad will be a medium between what is good and what is bad, as if there were likely to be something intermediate between all things. It is not, however, necessary that this result should ensue, for this conegation of things that are opposed belongs to those things of which there is a certain medium, and between which a certain interval has been fitted by nature to exist. But as regards these, there is not a difference in existence, for in another genus are those things to be classed of which there are conegations, wherefore the subject of them is not one. Chapter 6. And in like manner also, concerning unity and plurality, a person might express the following doubt. For if plurality be opposed to unity, absolutely or simply considered, there ensue certain consequences that are impossible. For unity will be a thing that is few in number, or will amount to few things, for plurality is likewise opposed to the few. Further, are two things many, since the twofold is manifold, and so also is two denominated twofold. Wherefore, unity is a thing that is few in number, for relatively to what are two things styled many, unless in reference to unity and fewness, for nothing else appears to be less. Further, must this be admitted, if, as what in length are the long and the short, so in multitude are the much and the few, and whatever may be much is also many, and the many is also much, unless there is some difference then in a thing that is continuous and easily defined. Fewness will be a certain multitude, wherefore will unity be a certain multitude if, also, it be that which is few, and this must needs be so if two things are many. But perhaps plurality is styled somehow also as the much, yet as being a thing that is different, as water which is much, but not many. But in respect of as many things as are divisible, therein subsists the many, or plurality, in one way, if the multitude involves superabundancy, either absolutely or relatively to something, and in like manner it is the case with fewness, if the multitude should involve deficiency. But in another way plurality subsists as number, which also alone is opposed to unity. For in this way do we denominate unity or plurality, just as if one should say unit and units, or a white thing and white things, and things that have been measured in respect of measure, and that which is capable of being measured. So also things which are manifold are denominated many, for each number is many because it is one, and because each is measurable by one, and as being that which is opposed to unity, not to fewness. So indeed then two things are many, likewise, yet they are not so as a multitude involving superabundancy, either relatively or absolutely, but primarily. And two things are simply what are few, for it is the first multitude which involves deficiency, and two is the first multitude in number. Wherefore Anaxagoras did not correctly withdraw his assent from the current opinion when he laid down that all things had a subsistence at the same time, and were infinite both in multitude and smallness. But he ought to have said, instead of this expression, that things were infinite both in smallness and paucity, for paucity or fewness does not constitute infinity, since fewness does not subsist on account of unity, as some philosophers would make out, but through duality. Unity, therefore, and plurality, such as are to be found in numbers, are opposed in the way a measure is opposed to that which is measurable, and these things are opposed as those that are relative to something, I mean as many things of those that are relative as do not involve an essential subsistence. Now a distinction has been drawn by us elsewhere to the effect that relatives are predicated in a twofold way, partly as contraries, and partly as scientific knowledge is related to that which may be made an object of science, because something else is predicated with respect to them, but that the one may be less than a certain thing, as for example than two, there is no hindrance to this being the case. For though it be less, it does not follow that it also be what is few in number. Multitude, however, is, as it were, the genus of number, for number constitutes multitude, which is measurable by one, and unity and number are, in a manner, opposed, not as a thing that is contrary, but, as has been stated, as some of those things that are relatives. For as far forth as unity is a measure, and number that which may be measured, thus far are they opposed to each other. Wherefore not everything that may be one constitutes number, as, for example, on the supposition that there is anything that is indivisible. But though science is denominated in like manner in relation to that which may be made an object of scientific knowledge, it is not yet similarly attributed as such. For science would appear to be a measure, but that which may be an object of science would appear as that which is being measured. It happens, however, that every science is a thing fit to be an object of scientific knowledge, yet everything that is an object of science is not a science, because in a certain respect is science measured by that which may be made an object of scientific inquiry. But neither is multitude contrary to fewness, but the much is opposed to this as a multitude which is excessive is opposed to a multitude that is exceeded. Nor is multitude contrary to unity altogether, but in respect of unity the case stands just as has been stated, namely, that one sort is divisible, but another indivisible, and again a third subsists as a relative, just as science subsists with respect to what may be made an object of science on the supposition that science constituted number, and that unity were a measure. Chapter 7. And since between contraries there is a possibility of there being something that is a medium, and of some there is a medium, it is necessary that media should derive their being from contraries. For all media, and the things of which they are media, are contained in the same genus. For we denominate those things media into whatsoever a thing that is undergoing a change must needs be changed in the first instance. For example, if one should pass from the hypate to the neat, if the transition be made in a short space of time, he will previously reach the intermediate sounds. And the case is the same in colours. If one will pass from white to black, he will come to the purple, and that which is duskish previously to his reaching what is black. And in like manner is it with other things. But that a change should take place from one genus to another genus is not possible except according to accident, as for instance in a transition from colour into figure. It is requisite then that media, and the things of which they are media, should be contained in the same genus also with themselves. But unquestionably is it the case that all media are, at any rate, media of certain things that are opposed. For from these alone is it possible should arise a change that is essential. Wherefore it is impossible that there should subsist any medium of things that are not opposed, for otherwise would there be a change, and that not from things that are opposed. But there is no medium of contradiction in things that are opposed, for this constitutes contradiction, and amounts to antithesis, or opposition, and to an opposition of which, in any respect whatever, one of the members is present, having no medium between that of which, in any respect, either of the members, the yes or the no, is present, or, in other words, not having any medium at all. But of the rest, some are relatives, but others are privation, and some are contraries. But as many things belonging to those that are relatives as are not contraries do not involve a medium, and a cause of this is the following, inasmuch as they are not contained in the same genus. For what is there that is a medium between science and that which may be made an object of scientific knowledge? But there is a medium between the great and the small. Now, if media are contained in the same genus, as has been demonstrated, and are media between things that are contrary, it is necessary that these, likewise, be compounded of these contraries, for either will there be a certain genus of them, or there will not be any such. And if there will be a genus of them in such a way as that there be something antecedent to the contraries, those contrary differences will be antecedent which may make the contraries as species of genus. For from genus and differences subsist species. For example, if white and black be contraries, and the one is a segregative colour, but the other a congregative colour, these actual differences, I mean discretive and syncretive colours, will have an antecedent subsistence. Wherefore, these contraries involve a subsistence prior to one another, but surely contraries at any rate that are different are contraries in preference. And the other things and the media will arise from genus and differences, as, for instance, whatever colours are media between white and black, these it is necessary should be denominated as consisting from genus. But colour is a genus, and from certain differences. They themselves, however, will not constitute primary contraries, and if this be not the case, everything will be either white or black. These, then, are other colours. Accordingly, these will be the media between primary contraries. Primary differences, however, are those which are segregative and congregative. Wherefore, in regard of these primaries, as many as are contraries not in genus, we must investigate the following point: from what the media of these consist. For it is necessary that things contained in the same genus should be compounded either of things incomposite in that genus, or that they should be incomposite natures. Therefore are contraries uncompounded one of another, so that they are first principles. But the media constitute either all things, or not any at all, and from things contrary something is generated. Wherefore there will ensue a change into this previously to a change into contraries, for of each thing will there be both less and more. Accordingly will there subsist a medium, and this a medium between contraries. And all the other things that are media are composites then, for that which is a medium is more than one thing and less than another, and is in a manner compounded of those things of which it is said to consist, as greater than one of them and less than the other. And since as regards contraries, things that have an antecedent existence are not homogeneous, all media would arise from contraries. Wherefore both all things to be found in the scale of existence downwards, and contraries and media, will consist from primary contraries. That indeed therefore the media are all contained in the same genus, and that they are media between contraries, and that these media are all composed of contraries, this is evident. Chapter 8. Diversity, however, in species is a something that is diverse from a certain thing, and this must needs subsist in both, as for instance, if animal were a thing diverse in species, both would be animals. It is necessary then that in the same genus there be contained those things that are diverse in species. For by genus I mean a thing of such a sort as that by which both are styled one and the same thing, not involving a difference according to accident, whether subsisting as matter or after a mode that is different from matter. For not only is it necessary that a certain thing that is common be inherent in them, for instance that both should be animals, but also that this very thing, namely animal, should be diverse from both. For example, that the one should be horse, but the other man. Wherefore this common characteristic simultaneously is found in things that are different in species from one another. Therefore this will be such a particular animal essentially, and that will be an animal essentially different, as that will be a horse and this a man. It is necessary accordingly that this difference should amount to a diversity of genus. For I term a difference of genus diversity which makes this very thing to be diverse. Therefore will this constitute contrariety. And the same is evident from induction likewise. For all things are distinguished by things that are opposite, and it has been demonstrated that contraries are contained in the same genus. For contrariety amounts to perfect difference, and every difference which is contained in a species is something belonging to a certain thing. Wherefore is this both the same and a genus in both. Wherefore also all contraries are contained in the same coordination of predication, as many as are different in species, and not in genus, and diverse, particularly one from another. For perfect is the difference between them, and they are not generated simultaneously with one another. Difference then amounts to contrariety, for this constitutes what it is to be diverse in species, namely, for things to involve contrariety when they are contained in the same genus, things, I say, that are individual. Now, things are the same in species, as many as do not involve contrariety, when they are individual existences. For in division and in media are contrarieties generated before one comes to those things that are individual. Wherefore it is evident that respecting that which is said to be a genus, neither the same nor diverse in species is any of those things which are adapted for being species as of a genus. For matter is made manifest by negation, and genus is the matter of that of which it is termed a genus, not as the genus of the Heraclides, but as that which subsists in nature. Nor is genus denominated in relation to those that are not contained in the same genus, but in relation to those of which there will be a difference from them in genus. And things differing in species differ from those that are in the same genus. For the difference of that from which it is a difference in species must needs be contrariety, and contrariety belongs to those things that are alone in the same genus. Chapter 9. But perhaps one would raise the question why woman does not differ from man in species, when the female and male are contraries, and when contrariety amounts to difference. But neither are female and male diverse in species, although they are the essential differences of animal, and are not as whiteness or blackness. But the male and female are inherent in animal, so far forth as it is animal. Now, the following doubt is almost the same as the foregoing, namely, why it is that contrariety partly makes things diverse in species, and partly does not so. For example, why does it make that which has the support of feet, and that which is furnished with wings so, but does not make whiteness and blackness? Is this the case because some things are the proper affections of genus, and other things are less so? And since the one is form, and the other is matter, as many contrarieties as are contained in form create a difference in species, and as many as reside in form, when assumed together with matter, do not give rise to a specific difference. Wherefore, whiteness does not give rise to a difference of man, nor blackness, nor are these the specific difference of a white man in relation to a black man. Nor would one name be assigned to both, for man is as matter, but matter does not create a difference, for men are not forms of man. For this reason, although the flesh and bones are diverse, from which this man and that are made, yet the entire compound is a thing that is diverse to be sure, but not different in species, because contrariety does not exist in reason or form. But this entire compound is an individual thing. Now, Callias is form in conjunction with matter, and this, therefore, is the case with white man, because Callias is white, therefore man is white according to accident. Neither, doubtless, do a brazen and wooden circle, nor a brazen triangle and wooden circle, differ in species on account of matter, but because contrariety is present in the form. But whether shall we say that matter does not render things diverse in species, though being somehow diverse itself, or is it the case that it makes them so partly? For why is this horse diverse from this man in species, and yet the forms of these subsist along with matter? Is it because contrariety is inherent in the form? For there is obviously a contrariety subsisting between a white man and a black horse, and this, at any rate, is a specific difference, but not so far forth as the one is white and the other black, since even if both were white, nevertheless in species they would be diverse. But the male and female are appropriate affections of animal, but not according to substance, but in matter and body. Wherefore the same seed, in consequence of undergoing the same passive condition, is generated either as female or male. What indeed, therefore, constitutes diversity in species, and why some things differ in species, but others do not, has been declared. Chapter 10. But whereas contraries are diverse in species, and that which is subject to corruption, and that which is incorruptible are contraries, for privation is a definite impotentiality, it is requisite that things corruptible be diverse in genus from incorruptible natures. Already indeed, therefore, have we declared our sentiments respecting these universal appellations, so that it would not appear to be necessary that anything whatsoever that is incorruptible and corruptible should be diverse in species, as neither white and black should be so. For it is admissible that the same thing at the same time should be both corruptible and incorruptible, if there may be in subsistence aught of things that are universal, as man would be both white and black, and the case is similar with the mode of the subsistence of singulars. For the same man would not be white and black at the same time, although what is white is contrary to what is black. Of contraries, however, some according to accident are inherent in certain things, for instance, those that have been just now mentioned, and many others, but in the case of others this is impossible, I mean, those to which both that which is corruptible and that which is incorruptible belong. For nothing is corruptible according to accident, for that which is accidental admits of not being, but that which is corruptible belongs to those things which subsist of necessity in those things in which it is inherent, or that which is corruptible will be one and the same thing with that which is incorruptible, if what is corruptible admits of not being inherent therein. Either then substantially, or as inherent in substance, must that which is corruptible subsist in each of the things that are corruptible. But there is the same reasoning, likewise, applicable to the case of that which is incorruptible, for both belong to things that possess a necessary existence. So far forth, therefore, as one is primarily corruptible, and the other primarily incorruptible, so far are they in opposition to each other, so that they must needs be generically diverse. It is evident, therefore, that it is not possible that there be such forms as some affirm, for in such a case, as regards man, there will be one who is corruptible, but another who is incorruptible, although forms are said to be the same in species, with certain particulars, and not equivocal in respect of them. Things that are diverse in genus, however, are at a wider interval from one another than those that are diverse in species. End of chapter 10 of book 9. Recording in memory of Mitchell Edwards. Chapter 1 of Book 10 of Metaphysics by Aristotle, translated by John McMahon. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Geoffrey Edwards. Chapter 1. That indeed wisdom is a certain science conversant about first principles is evident from the early portions of this work, in which doubts have been expressed respecting statements that have been put forward by others concerning first principles. One, however, would feel doubtful as to whether it would be requisite to suppose wisdom or ontology to constitute one science or many. For if it does constitute one science, there is at any rate one science invariably of contraries. But first principles are not contraries. If, however, it does not constitute one science, as of what quality must we posit these many sciences? Further, to speculate into demonstrative first principles, is it the province of one or of many sciences? For if of one science, why, let me ask, is it the province of this more than of any other whatsoever? But if such speculation belong to many sciences, what sort must we consider these to be? Moreover, whether is there one science of all substances or not? For if there is not one science of all, it would be difficult to render an account of what sort of substances there is one science in existence. If, however, there is one science of all substances, it is an obscure point how it is admissible that there should be the same science of many substances. Further, the question arises as to whether demonstration is conversant about substances only, or also about accidents. For if demonstration be conversant at least about accidents, it is not conversant about substances. But if there is one demonstrative science about accidents, and another about substances, what, may I ask, is the character of both, and which of the two constitutes wisdom, or metaphysics? For demonstrative wisdom is that which is conversant with accidents. That, however, which is conversant with first principles is the wisdom that takes cognizance of substances. Neither, however, must we consider the science at present under investigation as a science respecting the causes that have been already enumerated in our treatise on physics. For neither should we act thus in regard of the final cause. For a thing of this kind is that which is good, and this resides in practical things, and in those entities that are in motion, and this imparts motion in the first instance, for the end is a thing of this sort. But the imparter of motion in the first instance does not inhere in those things that are incapable of motion. And, in general, one feels doubtful as to whether the science now under investigation is conversant about sensible substances at all, or not about these, but about certain other substances. For if metaphysical science be conversant with substances different from those cognizable to the senses, it will be conversant either with forms or mathematical entities. As regards forms, then, it is evident that they have no existence. But, nevertheless, one would feel doubtful, even though he should admit the existence of these forms. Why, forsooth, as in the case of mathematical entities, the same truth does not hold good in regard of other things of which there are forms. Now, I say that they have placed mathematical entities, no doubt, as intermediate between forms and things cognizant by sense, as it were, certain third natures beside both forms and those things that are here, I mean sensibles. But there is no third man, nor a third horse, beside both actual man and actual horse and singulars. And if, on the other hand, these mathematical entities do not subsist in the manner they affirm, about what sort of entities are we to assert that the mathematician is engaged? For surely he is not engaged about those things that are here, that is, about sensibles, for none of these constitutes the description of entity which the mathematical sciences investigate. Neither, certainly, is the science now under investigation, I mean metaphysics, conversant about mathematical entities, for no one of these possesses a separable subsistence. Nor, however, is it a science belonging to substances cognizant by the senses, for these are corruptible. And, in short, one would feel doubtful as to what sort of a science belongs the investigation of the matter of mathematical entities. For neither does it belong to physical or natural science, from the fact that the entire attention of the natural philosopher is engaged about those things that contain in themselves the first principle of motion and rest. Nor unquestionably is it the province of a science that institutes an inquiry respecting both demonstration and scientific knowledge, for respecting this very genus it creates for itself an investigation. It remains, therefore, that this proposed philosophy of ontology, or metaphysics, should make these a subject of its inquiry. And again, one would feel doubtful as to whether it is requisite to consider the science under investigation in the present treatise as conversant about first principles, I mean such as by some speculators are denominated elements. These, however, have been regarded by all philosophers as things that are inherent in composite natures. But it would rather appear to be a thing that is necessary, that the science of ontology under investigation at present ought to be conversant with universals, for every rational principle and every science are conversant about universals, and not about the extremes of things. Wherefore, in this case, ontology would be conversant about primary genera. And these would constitute both entity and unity, for these especially would be supposed to comprise all existences, and in the most eminent degree to be assimilated unto first principles, on account of their being classed in the category of things that derive their primary existence from nature. For when these have been corrupted, other things also are corrupted at the same time along with them, for everything amounts to entity and unity. As far forth, however, as it is necessary that differential qualities participate of these, if one will admit the subsistence of these genera, now no difference participates in the genus, Thus far, likewise, would it appear that we ought not to establish these either as genera or first principles. But further, on the supposition that that which is more simple is more a first principle than that which is less simple, but the extremes of those things that descend from the genus are more simple than the genera, for these are individuals, whereas the genera are divided into numerous species, and such as are different. Hence species would appear to be a first principle more than genera. As far forth, however, as species are liable to corruption in conjunction with their genera, the genera rather would seem to be more similar to first principles. For that which brings about the destruction of other things in conjunction with itself is a first principle. These, then, and other such points are some of those questions that involve matter of doubt. Chapter 2. Further, may the question be raised as to whether it is expedient to admit the existence of something besides and independent of singulars or not. But the science now under investigation is conversant with these. These are, however, infinite, those things, at any rate, which have a subsistence independent of, and besides singulars are, without doubt, either genera or species. But the science at present under investigation is not a science conversant about either of these, for the reason why this is impossible has been already stated. For in general, likewise, doth the following question involve a doubt, namely, as to whether it is necessary to suppose the existence of any substance separable from sensible substances, and those which are here, or whether this is not the case. But shall we say that these sensible things are entities, and that wisdom is conversant about these? For the fact is, we seem to investigate some different science, and this stands forth as the point proposed by us for investigation. Now, what I mean is this, that our aim is to discover whether there is anything that essentially involves a separable subsistence, and which does not reside in any nature belonging to those objects that are cognizant by the senses. But further, allowing that there is besides sensible substances any different substance, what sort of sensibles are those beside which it is requisite to establish the subsistence of this substance? For why should one seek to establish its existence beside men rather than horses, or beside these in preference to the rest of the animal creation, or in general to inanimate things likewise? Notwithstanding, the providing of different substances eternal in duration, equal in amount to substances that are cognizant by sense, and subject to decay, would appear perhaps to fall outside the province of the rational sciences. If, however, the first principle now under investigation be not separable from bodies, what other would one admit as existing in preference to matter? This, however, does not involve a subsistence in energy indeed, but in capacity. Rather, would species and form seem to be a first principle in a stricter sense of the word than this. Now, this is a thing that is subject to corruption. Wherefore, in short, there does not subsist an eternal substance that involves a separable existence as well as an essential subsistence. But such a position as this is absurd, for it appears to be the fact, and such are the subjects of inquiry at the hands nearly of all those that are most accomplished philosophers, that there is in subsistence a certain first principle and substance of this description. For how, let me ask, will there prevail order on the supposition that there is no subsistence of that which is eternal, and which involves a separable existence, and is permanent? But further, admitting that there is a certain substance and first principle, naturally, of such a description as we are at present investigating, and this one principle belongs to all things, and the same is the principle of those things that are eternal, and those that are corruptible, the question in such a case arises, why, on the supposition of the existence of the same first principle, some things are eternal amongst those that may be ranked under this first principle, but others are not eternal, for this constitutes the absurdity. If, however, there is one first principle of things that are corruptible, and another of those that are eternal, If, indeed, the principle, likewise, of those that are corruptible be eternal, we shall be involved in similar perplexity. For why, on the supposition of the existence of an eternal first principle, are not those things that may be classed as effects under this first principle eternal likewise? And on the supposition of the existence of a corruptible first principle, there arises a certain other principle of this, and again a different one of that, and so this progression of causes goes on to infinity. But if, on the other hand, one will seek to establish the existence of both entity and unity as those things that appear in the most eminent degree to be immovable first principles, in the first place, unless each of them signifies this certain particular thing and substance, how will they involve a separate subsistence and an essential one? But it is respecting those eternal and original first principles of this description that we are engaged in our investigations in the present treatise. Nevertheless, supposing both of them to signify this certain particular thing and substance, all the entities will be substances. For entity is predicated of all things, and unity also of some. That all entities, however, are substances is an assertion that is false. But further, how can the position of those be true who make out that unity is the first principle, and that this constitutes substance, and who from unity and matter generate the first number, and say that it is the substance of these? How, I say, does this assertion of theirs admit of being true? For how is it requisite intellectually to apprehend as one the duad and each of the other compound numbers? For on this point they neither say anything, nor would it be easy to make any assertion on the subject. Suppose, however, that any one will seek to establish, as first principles, lines, or the things that are connected consequentially with these. Now, I mean surfaces such as are primary. Yet these are not substances capable of a separate subsistence, but are sections and divisions, the former of surfaces, but the latter of bodies. But points are sections and divisions of lines, and further, they are the limits of these very same things, and all these are inherent in others, and there is no one of them that is separable. Further, in what way is it necessary for us to conceive the existence of a substance of unity and of a point? For of every substance is there generation, but of a point there is not, for a point amounts to division. And this likewise furnishes a subject of doubt, namely, that every science should be conversant about things that are universal, and about that which is of such and such a quality, but that substance should not belong to things universal, but rather should constitute this certain particular thing, and that which possesses a separable subsistence. Wherefore, if we admit that science is conversant about first principles, how is it necessary to consider substance as the first principle of things? Further, the question may be asked, is there anything beside entirety or not? Now, I mean by entirety matter and that which subsists in conjunction with this. For if, in fact, this be not the case, all things, at least, that reside in matter are subject to corruption. If, however, there subsists anything beside entirety, it would constitute the species and the form. In the case of what things, therefore, this would subsist, and in the case of what things it would not, it would be difficult to determine. For in the case of some things is it evident that the form is not a thing that is capable of a separate subsistence, as, for example, the form of a house is not separable from the house. And further, there is the question whether first principles are the same in species or in number, for if they are one in number, all things will constitute these. Chapter 3. Since the science of the philosopher, however, is conversant about entity, so far forth as it is entity, and this universally, and not as regards any one part, and since entity is multifariously predicated, and not in one way merely, this being the case, if entity be predicated equivocally, and not according to anything that is common, it does not fall under the province of one science to inquire into it. For there is not one genus of things of this kind. But if it be predicated according to anything that is common, it would fall under the notice of one science. Now, it appears that it is predicated after the same manner as both what is medicinal and salubrious, for likewise are both of these predicated multifariously. And in this way each is predicated in respect of the one being somehow referred to medicinal art, but the other to health, and a third to something else, yet each is referred to the same thing. For a medicinal discourse and a small knife are denominated in respect, the former of proceeding from medicinal science, but the other because it is serviceable to this art of medicine. And in like manner it is so with that which is salubrious. For a thing is termed thus, partly because it is indicative of health, and partly because it is productive of it. And the same mode exists in the case of other things. In the same way, therefore, is denominated entity in its entirety. For each of them is styled entity in respect of being a passion, or habit, or disposition, or motion, or something else of this sort, belonging unto entity, so far forth as it is entity. Since, however, there is a reduction of every entity to a certain one thing, and something which is common, so of contrarieties, likewise, each will be reduced to the primary differences and contrarieties of entity, whether multitude and unity, or similarity and dissimilarity, are the primary differences of entity, or whether there are certain other differences of such. For let these stand over as subjects for future discussion. But there is no difference whether the reduction of entity be made to entity or to unity, for even if they be not the same, but something different, they are at any rate convertible terms. For both unity also, in a manner, constitutes entity, and entity constitutes unity. Since, however, it is the province of one and the same science to speculate into all contraries, and since each of those is predicated according to privation, although, as regards some contraries at least, of which there is a certain medium, one would feel perplexed as to how they are predicated according to privation, as, for example, of the unjust and the just. This being the case, concerning all such contraries, I say, is it necessary, therefore, to posit privation as existing, not of the whole definition, but of the ultimate species. For instance, if one is a just man who, through a certain habit, has been from time to time obedient to the laws, the unjust man will not be altogether deprived of the entire definition of just man. But, inasmuch as in respect of habitual obedience to the laws he is in some point or degree deficient, in this respect, likewise, will there be inherent in him a privation of this definition. And in the same manner is it the case with other things. But as the mathematician institutes for himself an inquiry regarding abstract quantities, for he conducts his speculations by removing out of his consideration all sensible natures, such as gravity and lightness and hardness, and its contrary, and further also heat and cold, and other sensible contrarieties, but he merely leaves remaining quantity and continuity, some of which pertain to one, but others are in reference to two, and others to three, dimensions, as well as the passive conditions of these, as far forth as they are quantities and continuous. And this being the case, the mathematician does not speculate into them in reference to anything else, and of some things he examines into their natures and positions, one in respect of another, and into those things that are inherent in these, but of others into their commensurations and incommensurations, and of others into their ratios or proportions. But we, nevertheless, have established one and the same science as being conversant about all subjects of this kind, I mean, the science of the geometrician. In the same manner, therefore, is it the case in respect of entity likewise. For the things that are accidental in this, so far forth as it is entity, and the contrarieties of this, as far forth as it is entity, it is not the province of a different science from philosophy, that is, ontology, to investigate. For to physical or natural science may one ascribe the speculation of these, not as far forth as they are entities, but rather as far forth as they partake of motion. As to the sciences of the dialectician, however, and the sophist, they are sciences of the accidents, I admit, that reside in entities, but not so far forth as they are entities, nor do they speculate about entity itself, as far forth as it is entity. Wherefore, it remains that the philosopher or metaphysician should be a person qualified for speculating into the points we have just stated, in so far as they relate unto entities. Since, however, every entity is expressed according to some one thing, and something that is common, which is multifariously predicated, and as contraries are expressed in the same manner, for they are referred to the primary contrarieties and differential qualities of entity, and since it is possible that things of this kind should fall under the notice of one science, hence the doubt expressed in the opening parts of this work respecting first principles would be dissolved in this way. Now, the doubt I allude to is that wherein the matter of perplexity is involved in the question as to how there will be one science about entities that are many in number and which are generically different. Chapter 4. But since also the mathematician employs things that are common in a manner peculiar to himself, it would be the province of the first philosophy, that is, of ontology, to speculate into the original principles of these things. For that when from equals are taken away, the remainders are equal, is indeed a dogma that is common to all quantities. Mathematical science, however, speculates about a certain portion of matter, properly so called, appropriating it to itself, as for instance about lines, or angles, or numbers, or something else pertaining to other quantities, not, however, as far forth as they are entities, but so far forth as each of them is that which is continuous in one, or two, or three dimensions. Philosophy, however, does not institute an inquiry respecting those particulars that are contained in a certain portion of matter, as far forth as something amongst them is an accident in each of these, but it contemplates everything of this kind respecting entity, so far forth as it is entity. And in the same manner also does the case stand in regard of physical science as with mathematical. For physical or natural science speculates into the accidents or first principles of entities, so far forth as they are in motion, and not so far forth as they are entities. But we have said that ontology, or the first science, is conversant about these in as far as the subjects of them are entities, but not so far forth as they are anything that is different. Wherefore, we may set down that both this and the science of the mathematician are parts of wisdom or metaphysical science. Chapter 5. There is involved, however, in entities a certain first principle about which it is not possible to labour under any deception, but it is necessary invariably to do the contrary. Now, I mean, to speak conformably with truth, as, for instance, that it is not admissible that the same thing should be and not be in one and the same period of time, and the case is so with other things that are opposed to themselves in the same manner. And respecting points of this kind, demonstration indeed has no existence absolutely speaking, but in respect of this principle it has. For it is not possible to construct a process of syllogistic reasoning from a more trustworthy principle than this very axiom just mentioned, and it ought to be so, at any rate, if it is possible that there should subsist such a thing as a demonstration in absolute terms. As regards a person, however, who makes an assertion of opposite statements, for the purpose of proving wherefore it is false, must some such position be assumed, as that although the thing will actually be the same, with the non-possibility of being the same thing, and not being so at one and the same time, yet that it will not appear to be the same thing with it, For after this manner only can a demonstration be brought about in regard of one who affirms the admissibility of opposite assertions being verified of the same thing. And, in the next place, those people who are likely to take their share in mutual discussion ought in some degree to understand themselves. For in case this be not done, how will there subsist with these persons a community in regard of such mutual discussion? It is necessary, then, that each of the denominations should be known, and that they manifest some one thing, and not many things, but only one. And if it is equivalent in its signification to many things, one ought to make it evident towards which of these significations the denomination conducts one. Now, as regards a person who affirms that this thing both is and is not, this which he in general affirms to be, he affirms not to be, wherefore he asserts that the name signifies that which it does not signify, but this is impossible. Wherefore, if the assertion that the being of this particular thing involves any signification, it is impossible that contradiction concerning the same thing should be verified. Further, if a name has any meaning, and this be capable of verification, this also must needs be from necessity. But that which is from necessity it is not admissible at any time should not be. It is not for this reason, then, admissible that opposite assertions be true concerning the same thing. Further, on the supposition that assertion in no degree is more true than negation, the person who makes the affirmation that one is a man will in no wise the rather make a true statement than if he were to affirm that he is not a man. And a person who affirms a man not to be a horse would appear to speak truth either in a greater or not in a less degree than if he affirms that man is not man. Wherefore, one who affirms also that the same is a horse will speak true. For in a similar way it would be possible that opposite assertions should admit of verification. Wherefore, the consequence ensues that the same creature should be man and horse, or something else belonging to the animal kingdom. There does not, therefore, subsist in regard of these any demonstration in absolute terms. As relates, however, to the person who is for establishing these foregoing points, demonstration has an existence. And quickly would one likewise who after this manner had put the question to Heraclitus himself, force him to acknowledge that it is never a thing that is possible that opposite assertions should be verified of the same things. But at present, not comprehending his own theory in regard of what he says at all, he has embraced this particular opinion we have been just endeavouring to overthrow. And, in general, if the statement made by Heraclitus be true, neither would this very position of his be true. Now, I mean the admissibility that at one and the same time the same thing should be and not be. For as also on the supposition of these assertions having been divided, in no respect the more will affirmation be true than negation, in the same manner, likewise, will it be the case when both are conjoined and connected together, just as if affirmation is regarded as being one certain thing, in no degree the more will negation be true than the entire of the assumption which is made in an affirmation. Moreover, if it is possible to make no affirmation that is true, even would this very position be false, I mean, the assertion that no affirmation is true. If, however, there exists any assertion that is true, that point which is put forward by these Heraclitics would be decided, I mean, such philosophers as resist the truth of things of this sort, and in fact, altogether, do away with rational discussion. End of Chapter 5 of Book 10. Recording in memory of Mitchell Edwards.